Well, welcome. Tonight, we're going to talk about a committee that most people don't even know exists. And most people would believe that the whole committee is here. But let's talk about the Milford Republican Committee. I think that's the right title.
Republican Town Committee.
Milford Republican Town Committee. If somebody doesn't know, Uncle Ed, why don't we start with an introduction?
Ed Bertorelli, former chair of the Republican Town Committee.
And Le Petit Moi?
And recently elected RTC chair, Chris Kivior.
Ed, what is the Republican Town Committee?
Well, what people don't see is that the electoral laws in Massachusetts are pretty complicated as far as the way the parties are set up and whatever. And, you know, you go from simple as something like how are on the highest level, how the presidential electors are elected, the members of the Electoral College. And you go down from there. But statutorily, the laws in Massachusetts are the Constitution's pretty old. There's a Republican State Committee and a Democratic State Committee. And I'll just talk about the Republicans briefly. The Republican State Committee is a man and woman from each Senate district in Massachusetts. So that would be 40 districts times 2. So there's 80. They would elect the chairman of the party, the vice chairman of the party, the treasurer of the party, and they'd elect the national committee man and committee woman who then go to the national level. In a non-national Republican Party, the people who govern the Republican Party, it isn't the president, it's the Republican National Committee. I think they believe there are 103 of them, members, 2 from each state plus the chairman of the party. So that's the way it's set up. Now in the state, the Republican State Committee, like the Democratic State Committee, goes to the next level. And the next level will be the City or Town Committee. And they're the ones who are elected when everyone goes to vote in the presidential primary, if they do, every 4 years. You'll see down the ballot, there's a ballot with the committee men, the members of the town committee. And technically, we get together for meetings, but we also get together and go to the conventions to nominate governor's candidates or whatever. So it isn't a well-known process, but we are, the Democrat and Republican Town Committee are legal entities. So
Now, you have 700 members of the Republican State Committee?
No, 80.
You have
Each
300?
Senate
40 men, 40
Oh,
women.
each district, not
Yes.
each town or
Each
city?
district,
District, yeah.
yes,
So you have 80 plus 1.
plus the chairman.
Okay, that makes more sense. I was saying 2 per town.
No, 2 per district. Now, in my past life, I did that for about 16 years. I was the Republican State Committee man, so, in the district, yeah.
And you go to the state level to elect the people who go to the national convention?
And we also, the Republican State Committee also elects the presidential electors. I was twice a presidential elector, so if the Republican had carried Massachusetts, which didn't happen, I would have been an elector to vote for president.
In the Electoral College?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, so help me understand. We got 80 of us. We
run and that 80 members plus the chairman are the Republican Party of Massachusetts.
Okay,
They
so
make
the
the laws.
81 decide who is going to go to the convention.
They
You
could,
get
yes.
one? How many people does Massachusetts send to the convention?
The national conventions? Not
It
that.
varies, right?
Yeah, probably 30.
Oh, that many?
Yeah, we have a small delegation compared to some states, yeah.
Is it done by population?
By congressional district.
Okay.
Now, the bigger states, obviously,
Well,
yeah.
we have 10 people in the House,
Yeah, so exactly.
So California-
9 or 10, don't we? Yeah.
9 or 10, so
Yeah.
California has a few more.
Yeah, and,
Just a few.
yeah, and we don't, in our convention, unlike the Democrat, which is the big controversy, was we don't have a lot of superdelegates.
And I want to go through that, because that I don't understand to begin with, but is it relatively clean? If I want to run for Republican president, are there any, my understanding was if I'm a Democrat, if they like me, I start with a third advantage.
Yeah.
If the party doesn't like me, like Uncle Bernie seemed to
Yeah.
start 30% down
Well,
on,
yeah, in Massachusetts, in the Republican hierarchy, the governor and lieutenant governor and any other offices we might have don't have to run as delegate, whereas in the Democratic Party, they were superdelegates. Plus, it gave the Democratic National Committee woman, who was a Hillary ally, she was able to appoint several hundred people too, to sort of
but it sounded like
pad the numbers.
a third of the votes were,
Guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
Superdelegates,
Yeah,
correct.
she had them, I mean, he might have got 20 or 30, but she had the overwhelming
now,
majority.
you got candidate A, candidate B. Does the Republican State Committee get to decide, we like A but not B, so we're going to give A a lot more votes, or how does that work?
No, generally ours is more grassroots, sort of caucuses. People meet at different places through the district. You know, in each congressional district, you'll have a caucus, so any registered Republican can come and vote for a delegate. So, but realistically, Massachusetts is sort of a,
Well, no, but if I'm
An
running
afterthought
for
for president.
president or whatever,
yep,
I'm going to try and sell the 30 Massachusetts delegates to vote for me.
yep.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, do they have to vote for me if
If you won the primary.
I won the primary?
They have to vote for you on the first ballot.
Okay, so first ballot, if they took Milford's district, I get,
Joe Kennedy's congressional district.
okay, so Joe Kennedy's district, then I get those votes automatic. They don't split them or,
Not automatic, but it's too you're getting into the nitty-gritty. I'll give you an example. In 2000, you had the Republican primary, and you had John McCain and George Bush. So what happened was McCain won the primary in Massachusetts. I think Bush won I think McCain won New Hampshire as well. So we made an agreement where I was a Bush delegate in 2000 and 2004. I was able to go as a delegate because we made an agreement to allocate the delegates by proportion. But again, that's into the nitty-gritty. The more significant thing is on the state party level, because Massachusetts nationally,
no, but
realistically.
Ed, I think there's a question in people's minds, because if I won 51% and my opponent won 49, and there's 30 votes to be cast, do I get
It's tough.
half or?
It's hard to figure out. Given the fact that, for example, Chris could go to the delegate caucus and not like Donald Trump and get elected as a delegate. He would have to vote for Trump in the first ballot.
Okay,
because he won the
because
primary.
Trump
Because it's
won
only
the
binding on
primary.
the
Yes.
first ballot, correct?
Yeah.
If I don't get the requisite number, the minimum number in the first ballot, the second ballot,
I
everybody's.
think it's all bets are off. But the conventions are largely, that's why I say the national conventions are largely decided in advance. There's no drama in them anymore. 'Cause
Okay.
They're already predicted how you're going to vote. You get calls. If you're a delegate to the national convention, you get 100 calls about what you're thinking about doing. Are you amenable to being plied away on the second ballot? If it
Okay,
was
so you're being lobbied for ballot number two,
Two,
just in
yes.
case.
Yes.
There is a ballot number
Well,
two.
that was an argument this year at the Republican National Convention. They were saying if they could stall Trump on the first one, then they could elect
Anybody
someone
they
else, a Ted
wanted on
Cruz
the
on
second.
the
Yeah, yeah,
second
yeah,
or
yeah,
third,
yeah,
because
yeah.
certain states have,
Yeah.
maybe it was Texas, it was like 3 ballots or 4 ballots, so not all states are binding
Yeah.
just for one ballot.
So the Republican National Committee doesn't dictate a rule. Each state
No,
committee.
the National Committee does. On each level, the parties run the show. So the
but-
Republican National Committee dictates the rules for the Republican Convention. Yes.
But you're saying Texas could be 3 before I'm.
I believe
Well,
that
but
was-
let's say there's some states could say 2, some could
But
say
again,
1.
the drama's not. Right now, that's why I think the TV coverage is minimal. It used to be many more days. Now it's an afterthought. Yeah.
So that's on the national level.
Yeah.
So you put together the people who vote for the people who vote for the candidate.
Yeah.
On a national
And
level.
and on the state level, the Republican State Committee picks the presidential electors, who, if they were called on, would vote for president of the United States.
The electors from,
The electors, presidential electors, that's the title.
that's the But that's the Electoral College people?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And now there, again, there have been cases where there have been errant electors, very few. In other words, even though the state party, and we're getting into something that probably a lot of people are going, wow, but the state party, when they pick presidential electors, elects guaranteed 135% loyal Republicans to that, because you're not bound to vote for the winner of the state.
Yeah, but wait a minute, I think most people assume when they hear that, you're not bound to vote for the Republican winner. Are you saying that I could go in as a Republican elector and say, I'm voting for Bernie?
No.
Okay.
No.
It has to be.
No. What I mean by 100% Republican, it means that, for example, there was the story when James Monroe ran for president after Washington had served 2 terms, and there was Adams and Jefferson and so on. Well, he got every electoral vote, except there was one elector who said, I cannot vote for him because George Washington was the only president to get the unanimous Electoral College vote, and he didn't vote for him. So that the honor would be to Washington. So technically, I could vote for you or Chris or whoever.
If I'm a Republican.
Well, if the Republican candidate won Massachusetts,
Right.
now I'm a presidential elector.
Right.
I could choose to vote for who I want. That's why they nominate 100%.
Somebody who's
rock solid.
control
Rock so-
process, there's
Yes.
not going to be any radicals in there.
Exactly. Now, in this last election, there were some electors who voted for Bernie Sanders, not Hillary. They weren't covered much in the press because the press was more interested in plying off Donald Trump votes. But I know I believe there was an elector in Washington State, a Democrat, who voted for Bernie rather than Hillary. So there were a couple of electors who voted, Democrat electors who voted for.
I guess what I'm confused at is, don't I sign on to follow the process?
You do, but there's no legal thing here. There's no binding.
No, I mean, but if I've
Well,
given you my word that I'm going
There's
to
the
follow.
express process, but it's not, as
Yeah.
it's illegal.
Well, yeah, I'm saying you're not going to arrest me. But
No.
when I take on this responsibility, I've agreed to follow the
Yeah.
rules.
But for example, the person in Washington felt Bernie Sanders, even though he was a Democrat and Hillary carried the state, Bernie Sanders exemplified his philosophy. Maybe also the fact was that she had lost the election, so it wasn't a crucial. But you meet on, I believe it's the 10th of January after the election, and in every state capital. So all the electors in each state would meet in their capital, whatever room they're going to use in the state capital, and that's where they vote for
And
president.
it's probably safe to say that if I do not hold to my word, I probably won't get nominated the next
No.
time.
Correct.
And what a lot of states do is they make it a real ceremony. Like in Massachusetts, they'll have people could dress up in formal attire and go to the states. Each capital, in other words, you can see it on C-SPAN. You can see each state. It's an amazing process. They'll start from the beginning of the states and go to Alabama. They'll go to Massachusetts. You'll be in the Senate chamber in Massachusetts. The president of the Senate calls the elect thing, and then they vote right
And
there.
there's no way to hide it.
No,
If I'm
oh, no, you-
supposed to vote for Trump, and I say, yeah, I'm going to vote for Rump.
Yeah.
I'm doing that in public, and
Yeah, and they take the ballots and you put them in, and then they're counted,
Yeah.
and then the results are sent to
Yeah,
Washington.
they don't do a voice vote like.
Yeah.
right.
Our
I'm saying
legislature
there's no way to
generally
hide
does.
this.
Now remember,
Yeah, it's
this
like
was
a roll call.
also, the Electoral College was developed in a time when the transportation was, very minimal, so people voted in the Capitol. The results, were unclear. I mean, the presidential results were unclear for a while, so that's, I think, why they, had the ceremony, but yeah.
A lot of people ask the fundamental question, why do we need an electoral college?
Well, I think now you need it more than ever because with California going off the way it has, in our view, the Democrats make a big point of that Donald Trump didn't get the majority of the popular vote. I believe he lost it by 2.5 million. Well, California voted 4.5 million margin for Hillary, which is unheard of as far as and that in New York were enough to tip it over. So maybe you might say, if you're from a smaller state, do I want California, or a middle-sized state, do I want California picking my president? Continue. I think 99% of the people would say, are you kidding me? California? No. So, you know.
Well, 50% would say that.
Well, I don't know. We've got a state where they're doing illegals, and driver's licenses, and,
Well, no, but I'm
and
just
voting
saying-
questions and whatever. You're wondering.
When you looked at the coloring book, it
Yes,
was
but-
blue along the sides
but-
and red all in the middle.
But the point is, just even a small Democratic state, so they want to say, well, it's California, the values and morals and this and that,
Oh,
the
I see what
ethos
you're
of
saying. Do I want
California.
California deciding
Who's-
Hillary
who
or
the-
Bernie?
No, who the president's going to be.
Yeah,
given that
Hillary
they're
or
not-
Bernie.
That they're not in the, or Hillary or
Succinct
Bernie
with the rest of the
versus
country.
a Republican.
Yeah.
Because the fact is that Trump, as I say, 4.5 million of Hillary's margin came from.
But, a lot of people will say, if you did not have the Electoral College, wouldn't you get the Hillarys of the world, the Trumps of the world going to Rhode Island? Because now every vote in Rhode Island's worth as much as a vote in California.
No, you wouldn't. So
Why?
Not with the media and the way it is. There'd still be a question. But again, the process seems to, I guess, when anyone's unhappy with the electoral results, they talk about the electoral college.
Let's face it, the people who have less than 270 are going to say it doesn't work. The people with 271, if that's the right
Works
number,
perfectly.
will say it works perfectly. How many times, because I know you'll hate me, but I don't see any difference between the blue people and the red people. If you won, you think it's great. If you didn't, you're not so happy. But, the fundamental question is, what does the Electoral College do for us now?
No, the point is, though, I think one of the civics lessons involved is, rather than relying on rolling up margins in huge states, you're trying to build a national consensus. Ideally, you're supposed to be president of the entire United States. So if you didn't have the Electoral College, wouldn't you even be spending more time?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So if California gives me all their votes, once I hit 51%, it doesn't benefit me to hit 99%.
Well, now you just brought up a thought. You see, the other strange thing is that if you took, so let's just say Massachusetts, just say it has 10 electoral votes. If I carry Massachusetts by one vote, I get all the electoral votes.
But now, is that
Well, there's a-
universal?
It's almost universal, and the theory is, you see, the states are bundled together. There's only two states, Maine and Nebraska, that don't do that. They award their,
Are
and
they
the way they do,
proportional?
no, the way they do it is by the congressional district. So say in Massachusetts,
Oh.
something, and that's, when you think about it, that's really local government.
So the 10 congressional districts, if you won 6 and you won 4, you would get 6 and he would get 4?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah. Now think about that, because the thing is, in a state, it would mean that rather than winning a state by one and making you're disenfranchising the minority in the state, basically.
But if you do it that way,
Yeah.
don't you open up the gerrymandering issue? I mean, we had a congressional district, Richie Neal, if you remember.
Well-
went from almost Springfield, it was the banana.
Yeah, but that's how they voted. The point is, it's how they voted. The question is, if you carry a state by one vote,
Yes.
how do you take the other people and disenfranchise them, and you cast all the electoral vote? The congressional district is more local government sort of oriented. Be like I compare it to the sort of the town meeting sort of thing. But we could be on this forever, but the thing is, on the state level, the state party, again, which we're representatives of and members of the committee, are the governors of the state party.
But I can't gerrymander
Well.
a state. I can't arrange to say, oh, we got too many Republicans here, let's blend in.
Yeah, but
part of
again, I think
Worcester.
you're getting to a level. I'm basically a more primal thing is, how do you gerrymandering, all districts aren't gerrymandered in a state, period. That would be crazy to say that. But I just think it's strange that all the districts have to vote. Like, for example, in Maine, in the last election, one district voted for Clinton and one voted for Trump. So they gave one electoral vote. The state as a whole, this is where the safeguard was, the state as a whole went for Clinton, so she got the other 2 electoral votes, the the two senators.
Oh, okay.
So that was pretty reasonable. You didn't disenfranchise
Sure.
everybody.
Sure.
So say in Massachusetts, a Republican got 2 districts, and the Democrat
They'd
got
get
8.
at least 2 votes
They'd get
versus
2
none.
votes, and they'd get 8 votes the other way. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, yeah. But it's something that,
No, I'm just curious because,
yeah.
so you're saying 48 states go all or none?
yep. And only 2, Nebraska and Maine, small ones, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that'd be a fierce battle state by state because the national parties would really interfere, would come in and whatever. But
But I would think in this case, the red people would want proportional. In some years, the blue people would want proportional.
I think actually if you look at it, the red has been dominant for a long time, but not on electoral college. In other words, states like New York or California, which seem to be monolithic, aren't. So there's 40% of the voters are Republican, but they don't get any votes. So they might, I think if you look at the map of the country, yes, there's this blue on the coast, but overwhelmingly it's red.
Well, that was it. I mean,
It's
it's like
red.
somebody painted the
Yeah,
borders blue and
if you
everything
notice,
was red in
but
the
if you
middle.
notice, the blues are largely in large cities, and they only have so many congressional districts, whereas and the votes. But, as I said to you, the other thing which is troubling is that we talked about this at one of the shows is that there are a number of, as I said, and it even affects Milford, residents, legal or illegal, are counted toward congressional districts, even though they can't vote. So when they determine precinct size and congressional district size,
So when they do the census.
yes,
And we lost a congressman.
we would have probably lost more if they didn't count the
I was going
illegals.
to say, in that case, it worked, counting non-legal residents worked to the advantage of Massachusetts.
Well, perhaps, but how about on the local level? I mean, what is the argument? The argument would be, you said about congressional districts, how many, and they're mostly Democratic congressional districts, how many of them are made up where there's a huge percentage of people are illegal?
But they don't get to vote.
That isn't the point, but the congressman gets elected by basically nobody, because most of his
Constituents
citizens
can't vote.
Yeah, which is so they like that, but
So we've got 8 districts, roughly 16, 17,000 voters. So you're saying.
Where's that?
I mean, precincts in Milford.
yeah. So there'll be several precincts where a pretty good percentage of people are undocumented
So
or
when you
illegal.
sit there and say, I expect you to be running for 2,500 votes, you're really saying you could be running for 800 or 900.
Yeah.
Correct.
You take cities like parts of Boston, like East Boston, or other cities, Lynn and whatever. There's a very large percentage of people who are, not even in the political process. But
Brockton, Lawrence.
yeah.
Yeah.
But to go back to the Milford thing, I mean the committee's obviously been around for since the beginning, as far as whatever.
So when you were hanging out with Paul Revere, or
Yes.
before you came in, Ed, tell me what was the landscape, what was the
Okay.
view?
Well, interesting. You said Paul Revere. People know there's the Montgomery Lodge of Masons in Milford. It's on Main Street.
Middle of Main Street.
Yes. That's one of the lodges that was founded by Paul Revere. He founded several Masonic lodges, and they have a beautiful gift of silver, because obviously Paul Revere was one of the silversmiths in the world and in the United States. So those lodges have whatever. But again, we go back to the political landscape, and Chris has got to cut in because I'm talking too much. But anyway.
No.
No.
But Ed, walk us through before
Okay.
you came.
Okay, the
Because I'd
state-
like to get Chris's prospective
Okay,
view,
the state.
but it's a retrospective
Okay,
view.
the state had been basically boringly Republican on the local level, and the House and Senate in Massachusetts, boringly Republican till shortly after World War II.
Okay.
There were Democratic governors, but the House and the Senate had been Republican since the Civil War. Period.
This is our Massachusetts?
That's right.
Okay. Somehow I can't picture.
Well, it had, that's basically 100 years. So what happened was when World War II ended, the Democrats had been making inroads, obviously, and part of it was ethnic. A lot of people still stayed with the Republicans, but the ethnic voters, the Irish were particularly stronghold of the Democrats, but they were still not dominant. And other ethnic groups split their votes. The Italians and the French were the two big groups in the state then, as far as with the Irish and of course the old English settlers. But Tip O'Neill was one of the people who came back, the genius, political genius, came back from the war and recruited a whole raft of young veterans to run for House and Senate and whatever. Well, the Republicans weren't too anxious to bring in ethnic people into their party. So they really ignored the Italians and the French, and they stuck with the old-timers. So district after district, the Republicans didn't have a what would you call it, a farm team. So district after district changed, and I would say it was probably the early 50s the Democrats took control of the House and the Senate in Massachusetts and never gave it up.
And never looked back.
Yes. And the Republican Party started its decline on the local level because of the number of... Now, I got involved 51 years ago. It's hard to envision that, time frame, but that was in the era of the Vietnam War, and the Republican Party had John Volpe as the governor, Elliot Richardson as lieutenant governor, Ed Brooke as the attorney general. I mean, we will look back and now go, and then Ed Brooke became the senator, of course, for 2 terms. That was the golden age in that sense of offices, but the local level had started
And
to...
Richard Milhouse was involved at that point?
Well, you figure 60, whatever, he had lost it. He had lost the 60 election, but
Right.
Johnson was in. So Vietnam was, who cared about Nixon? Vietnam was much more
It was a Johnson thing.
Johnson thing, and McCarthy and whatever. But the state had been reliably moved over to the... Now, there was still some congressmen in the state had hung on, but they were all gradually going down too. The state was becoming more and more Democratic. So that's where it stood there, and then through the times, obviously the era that I remember is from the Bill Weld era on, and as I said, again, still on the local level, we had a really atrophied party. You really had no one who would even run as a Republican. And honestly, I can remember back in '90 when we started to field candidates, we got a lot of pressure and nastiness from people. How dare you run candidates? These are the Democrats are the candidates. That's it. Well, who are you guys to?
Well, that was the whole idea that if you weren't either independent or Democrat for a lot of the elections, your vote meant nothing.
Well,
Because
again,
the
there were
primary
no.
was the
but
deciding.
there were no. And remember, the number of independent voters was smaller then, much smaller, unenrolled or independent. There were more Republicans than were Democrats. The number of Democrat enrollments has fallen dramatically as the unenrolled has gone up. Because of part of its age, part of it is that a lot of the older people who were the Depression and the generation who
But
came
now,
out of the
when
war.
you started, describe a typical Republican versus when you're stepping out.
I don't know. That's an interesting one. I see today a lot of families, younger families, and families whose grandparents had been solid Democrats, whose parents were meds, and who the grandkids more or less vote for the person. I think that's something we're going to see today. And Chris is inheriting the committee where a lot of younger people don't want to really be involved in, a political
So
title.
now, Chris, the millennials come in. We've heard 50 years ago, the Republican Party was kind of stodgy old, it was what it was and it's not changing. In over 50 years, the state goes from red to blue. Now you're walking in as a millennial. What's today's Republican look like?
I think in terms of the state, of course, we'll talk about the state realm. The state legislature, still obviously majority Democratic. But I think the Republicans are certainly ticking up. If you look back to 2010, I believe it was 13 or 15 new Republican state reps were elected that election cycle, which doubled their count.
I was going to say, are we up to 30 now,
It's
or?
35 now.
Okay.
Granted,
Yeah.
still out of 160, but still, I mean, to uptick that many, and I think we've gained a few since then, and maybe lost one or two. In terms of the state Senate, when Senator Fatman was elected in 2014, Vinnie DiMacedo down the Cape was elected as well, so the count went from 4 to 6. Now there's 2 special elections going on, so that might go from 6 to 8, and I don't think it's been at 8 for
A while.
some
yeah.
time, and that's out of 40. And so it's not necessarily a case of getting 51% or over half, whatever that number is. It's just enough to maintain a governor's veto, I think, is the more reasonable thing, given that Republicans keep the governor's seat, which if you look at the past 27 years, they've done a pretty good job at, other than Governor Patrick, who was there for 8 years, obviously, but every other governor has been, since 1990, essentially has been Republican.
When was Governor Dukakis?
The 3 terms before, he was before Weld,
Yeah.
but he served actually 3 terms.
So talk to me about how can such a blue state elect a Republican CEO?
Yeah, I think,
That may be the reason. So, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think in terms of a governorship in general, it's very different than, say, a U.S. senator, a congressman or woman, because the governor of a state is the CEO, the executive of that state. They can make changes a lot quicker. Or certainly each state still has a legislature or an assembly, whatever they call it. But definitely the effects of a Republican governor, executive of a state, seems to be clearly more appealing to Massachusetts voters. And by and large, Republicans in Massachusetts are more of a moderate ilk, socially liberal, fiscally conservative, and that seems to be a recipe that works if you look at the...
As long as you stay in Massachusetts.
Well, there's other states as well, too. Yeah.
There's a few other states.
Yeah,
but
Well, I mean,
absolutely.
I think about
Absolutely.
our governor. When Weld went out to the square states, didn't seem like a real happy welcome. That socially aware thing didn't seem to go over well.
Well, he was using that for a reason.
You could say John Kasich is the same type of, almost in terms of ideology, the same as Governor Baker. Obviously,
And
Ohio is a
Weld?
lot more of a swing state.
Yeah. I would, having served in the state party with Governor Weld, people may have liked Governor Weld, but Governor Weld was not a party builder. He was actually a reverse party builder. So I'd just say that. I mean, to people who like Governor Weld, when I served at the ground level, he did not help elect other Republicans.
How about
And that
Baker?
was a problem with me.
How about Baker?
The exact opposite.
So I was going to say, it seems like, when you look at Charlie, I've heard people complain, God dang it, he's doing what he promised.
Yeah,
He's a manager.
he gets it.
He's a consummate manager.
Both Charlie Baker and our Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito, they are out constantly, obviously
Right.
depending on the election cycle, but they're at campaign events for state rep candidates, state senate candidates, county-wide candidates pretty frequently. Phone banking, knocking on doors, help fundraising, so they're certainly in it to build the party,
But
which will eventually
all of
help
that,
them.
Chris, seems nice, but Karen and Charlie both seem to be doing the right things for the right reasons. So it's great that they show up and they wave the flag, but at the end of the day, when he stands up for issues that he believes in, that don't necessarily go lockstep with the Republican Party, I think that gets him a lot of points.
Well, it does, and what I always find frustrating, I'd say this as a Republican, is when Democrats say bipartisanship, that means that the Republicans should be doing, when I hear Nancy Pelosi and the not lamented Harry Reid.
Oh, come on, she's clear, Ed. Bipartisanship means you do what I want.
Well, yes, exactly.
I mean, there's no question.
Exactly.
She's honest to a fault.
And
on
here
that.
you are, a person who's presided over. This is another thing, which is growth in Massachusetts has been phenomenal. But the number of Democrat and Republican state reps and senators in the country, of all the state legislatures, has never been higher since the 20s. Never been higher.
Now, from
That's
a
amazing.
millennial
Absolutely.
perspective,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that are still labeled Republicans, labeled Democrats. And then you have that term that I hate, which is unenrolled. I can't be an independent, because apparently there's an independent party.
They grab the name, yeah.
They grab the name and says you can't use it. So when I say I'm unenrolled, it really annoys me because it makes me feel like
You're not a voter.
yeah, I'm not involved. It's uninvolved. How do you feel of the unenrolled? How much or what percentage do you think lean towards the Republican vision more than the Democrat?
I mean, in this state, if you were to look at the demographics of the Massachusetts electorate, 11% are registered Republicans, 33% are registered Democrats, so they still outnumber us
Holy
3 to
moly, that
1.
leaves 60% in the middle.
The rest are unenrolled. So largely elections.
Of that 60%,
Yeah.
if you had no choice, but you either stuck a blue or a red tag on them, what do you think percentage-wise of the 60 would go red?
I'd guess a slight majority red.
Yeah. I mean, granted, there's a 100% turnout of those.
Well, no,
people, which-
but
Yeah, I mean,
if
yeah.
you think
Most, slightly
of it.
slightly more than half of the
But then you're
independents.
saying 40% are Republican
But
thinking
you've
in
already
this
said,
Commonwealth.
but you've already said millennials, and this drift started with my generation, the baby boomers from parties. It started from there down.
Well, I mean, I shifted
Drift
to
away from
unenrolled.
No, but I meant drift away from identification with parties.
But I was going to say, I went unenrolled when I found out that if I want to vote in the
Yes.
Democratic
Or
preliminary
Republican. Or
or Republican primary,
Yes, it gave you more power.
I couldn't, if I was labeled red, well,
Yeah.
now, never understood, Massachusetts, red is Democrat,
Well,
blue
whatever, yeah,
is
well, yeah.
Republican. But,
Well,
Yeah.
unfortunately, we're at the point now where I have some friends that when they first registered, 5 or 6 years ago, they had registered as unenrolled, which is, they're registering to vote, which is good. And maybe they're not sure on one side or another. Through college, they're graduated now. Some are pursuing their masters, but they had never switched to the Republican Party because, unfortunately, in this state, and I'm sure some others, and I'm sure other states, it's the opposite of what I'm about to say, but it's not too friendly a place to kind of pour out your Republican thoughts.
Certainly if you're in college.
it's-
Very dangerous.
well, certain colleges.
Yeah.
Certain
Well,
colleges
I think
and- I
just
mean-
about all in Massachusetts.
Well,
so,
yeah, but you got Berkeley that's wide open to all opinion that's ultra-liberal.
Okay, yeah. You do
Right?
well. You do well in Smith College, Wellesley. Yeah,
And
tar and feathered.
It's that false,
Yeah.
and Democrats, I will say, definitely in the state among youth, are far more vocal, and that's probably because of the state makeup, but I can say that in my experience, that probably equal proportion, almost, say 40, 45% are Republican, but they're just not as loud.
Yeah.
And so people make the generalization
Yeah.
thinking, well, all the millennials they're all Democrats, and that's the wave. And
No, but I
it's
think
not
the
true.
volume really is best judged at the ballot box.
But then you also have this is again when we have our conservative show. Bob Burns talks about this. The Democrat Party and their allies have how many hundreds of thousands of paid supporters between unions, between the public employee union, these demonstrations that appear everywhere, the Antifa group or whatever. They are the average Republican out there is working, doing whatever. You don't hear much about. You hear them at the ballot box, and I'd say Chris is exactly right about the youth sentiment. But then you take the youth sentiment in the southern states, and by the way, anyone in the North who denigrates the southern states should realize there's a good number of Northerners who live in the South
Right.
now. And I'll pit North Carolina's infrastructure and progress against Massachusetts any day, and there are plenty of young people down there who are
Ed,
Republicans.
I mean, I look at
So,
my own daughters, and I won't say which one because the other will get mad, but
well,
in
yeah,
college,
yeah.
the whole idea of socialism, that everybody should have what they need, that everybody should contribute, what they can. Utopia, world peace. Who would vote against world peace? Then all of a sudden,
Well,
oh, stop it. But then all of a sudden, they get out of school and they got their first paycheck.
the reality
shock
sets in.
that they felt of saying, how much am I paying for utopia?
And of course, the irony is most of the schools that project that, at least in a greater sense, are charging $50,000, $60,000 a year to attend.
For professors who do little, if anything, and who have, in state and private systems, who have the jobs of a lifetime forever with tenure, no matter what they do.
Yes.
But but see, we're talking about something, and we're in an interesting stage now because of whatever, but when I was getting involved, you had Vietnam. You had the draft, which was slightly ending, and you also had a country sharp. You're talking about country divided now. This is nothing compared to, there's a lot of people out.
You don't see the demonstrations on the
No, you don't
mall
see
and-
people being spit on when they come back with a uniform on, and now, of course, everyone conveniently forgets that. The Jane Fondas of the world actually raise their head above a rock.
To this day,
Yeah, so-
I cannot watch
Well,
a movie with her in it because I keep thinking about.
you heard her talk about Harvey Weinstein?
No.
Well, she was throwing some things at him after he was down. I guess she should talk to the veterans, and she stood above the.
The Hanoi Hilton. I'm sorry.
She stood on a gun while under the cells underneath her were the Vietnam veterans, and then she took the notes.
The notes are what kill me.
The notes.
The notes are
They
what
gave
killed
her notes. Please get this out, and she turned them in. So Jane, maybe you should take the abuse these soldiers got. But again, when you're a Hollywood liberal and you're whatever, I guess you're the beautiful people. But now you bring that forward with the armed conflicts we've been in, and we have again a whole series of veterans, obviously different trained and
Yeah, but
and they're
Ed,
coming back.
Wait a minute. The veterans coming back, I'm okay with somebody saying I'm against the Iraq War. I'm against the Afghan War. But showing respect to the people we sent over.
It's a market. It's a
Who
market.
didn't have a choice.
Well, yeah, but wait a minute. When these kids came back after risking their life to do what their country told them to do, and they spit on them, they called them baby killers, I got a problem.
Yeah, well,
You can hate the game, but don't blame the players.
and a lot of the people doing it were the elites. I remember a statistic, and I only know it because my uncle in Maryland lived in the district. There was only one congressman who had a son who was in Vietnam. Out of all the 535, 435, and 100 senators, one. So it showed you the war was different. But I think today is that the level today, unfortunately, is that people come back and there's no hostility today. But how do we help to get people jobs and get them back integrated into the economy, and they're able to tell their stories in a way that help other young people? That's the tragedy.
Tell me about this whole kneeling and rolling on the ground or whatever the heck they're doing when the national anthem comes out.
Well, we still on the I don't know if this is a Republican or Democrat or whatever, but I just want to say one thing. What Chris said about the millennials, I think the one thing is a lot of the icons of politics have vanished. The truth came out. Obviously Nixon was overwhelmingly elected as president. We saw the problems with him, even though he rehabilitated himself later as a world statesman. You saw when a lot of my generation committed to President Kennedy because he, for religious and political reasons, was the choice. It was an affirmation. Then we saw some of the things that were, so people deeply, especially my generation, I say the baby boomers, became real cynical about politics. And I think sort of passed a lot of that on to the millennials and
Ed,
whatever.
To this day, I will submit Hillary and Richard Milhouse himself suffered from the same I'm above the law.
The party identification means
'Cause
nothing.
I believe that if Nixon had gotten up, put his hands out and said, I blew it.
Yeah,
I
that'd
was
be it.
wrong. Please forgive me. The Americans I know don't kick people when they're down.
Yeah.
I think they would have given him a second chance.
Well, you see the Ken Burns series on Vietnam now, and I've heard of different segments because I've not watched it, but they talk about the tape conversations between Nixon and Kennedy, and so that's at the beginning of the war because you figure Kennedy was killed. I mean,
Well,
I mean
62
Johnson
Johnson
and Kennedy.
Johnson.
So in '62, talking basically the jig's up here. Yet, they wanted to make sure they were elected in '64.
But something as symbolic as kneeling.
Yep.
What's your perspective?
Relative to,
How did it start first? That was the thing.
well, let's say,
Ed, don't care. I'm
You
an
do?
athlete.
yeah, so relative to the NFL, you are, contracted, it's a business, and so, you can say it's a First Amendment right, but while that may be your First Amendment right, it's the owner's, it's up to him to whether he
And
can.
see, I have the right, under
It
that
certainly
pesky
doesn't
First
make it
Amendment, to make
good at
fun of
all.
your mother.
Could do anything you basically.
But does it feel right? I mean, I'm
No,
sorry,
absolutely
there's
not.
this emotional thing about the national anthem and the flag that it's like making fun of your mother. It just, whether it's legal, whether it's your right,
I
it
get-
doesn't feel
I
like
guess
something you should
I
do.
guess that the thing that gets me is, we'll go into how this started at the beginning, but you see the people who are doing it, and I don't know if you could give them a history lesson where they know or care, because they're in it for the money, number one. Okay, that's what they're there for. Give them a history lesson on there's no country in the history of the entire world that's ever taken more people in as immigrants into this country. Now, you could argue, as some of these people do, that, well, African Americans were brought here involuntarily. Okay, when slavery was, okay. Well, we know the economics of slavery. We know the fact that human beings had a value attached to them. Pretty frightening to think about, but I guess everyone has a value attached to them today, even though we don't talk about it in those terms.
Don't
today.
ask my wife, she'll tell you I have no value
Okay.
attached to me.
Oh, I can't believe that. So, but still, we look at the strides and the access and whatever, and you find also that, I remember when as I said, I worked for Senator Brooke. Senator Brooke talked about the fact that the armed services were the great way for African Americans to advance in a segregated country.
Or immigrants.
No, but in this particular thing, that the rights, as Senator Brooks said, I'm fighting in Italy, and I come back and I face, luckily I lived in Washington, but when I came back to Massachusetts, I faced, especially with an Italian war bride wife, came back and faced some, difficult decisions. So, you have to look today, how much are any of our public educated about the history of our country, the beautiful history of what we've done with all the immigrant people. But to me, the football players look like just spoiled brats to me. I mean, I can't, contrast it to the sacrifice of the veterans. For what do the veterans get paid? Probably in 10 years they get paid for one of these people, getting what?
If they're lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, making $3-4 million a year. I don't know too many of these vets coming home to $300,000 salaries. So, again, I have a hard time because if I want to protest, I should have the right to protest. But don't make fun of my mother. Don't make fun of my flag.
I mean, you could argue that these people have such high profiles, they can have a press conference after the game, right? And you could get
Or after the anthem. I would even be
Sure.
more forgiving
Sure.
if you stood up, honored the country, and then said, hey, now I'm going to do my own little protest because I think we ought to be better.
I think they're also, to go back a little, a reality check too, I think before we started getting involved in the wars again, Afghanistan and others, and Vietnam had worn off because we have short memories, but I'm sure there were a lot of people at athletic events who yawned through the national anthem. They obviously stood, but didn't pay attention. But a lot of the sacrifice of our soldiers, men and women, and that's the other thing, women, for the first time where you see men and women come back as casualties. It affected a lot of people at the games and at athletic
But
events.
see, I see the one Army Ranger veteran who stood up for his country, his friends getting criticized. I'm like, wait a minute.
But-
You can't have it both
And
ways.
what did that do to that? The irony is, what did that do to that team and its morale? When you let this interfere with this stuff, you know, and to have a coach that would basically say, we're going to hide in the locker room and avoid the national anthem,
And to
go
kind of-
somewhere else
to
and
kind
do
of
that.
Broaden it a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I think large in part, sports is something that people can watch, participate in, go to, attend,
Yeah.
what have you, to escape their jobs, politics, noise, and you know they're there to enjoy
Well,
the
if
game.
you think about it, when you
sport.
go to Gillette Stadium, Fenway Park, how many times have you ever asked a guy or gal next to you, are you a Republican or a Democrat?
Yeah, never.
I'm not going there for
No, I'm
political.
looking more of the Yankee fan, Red Sox fan, or whatever.
Sure.
Well, yeah, I just got into I was up at Holy Cross and we were playing Fordham, and the bus driver had this hat on, and I said, YN? What kind of
course.
hat is YN?
God's team.
And he looked at me and he goes, that's a Yankees hat.
What?
New York. I said, oh. I thought it was YN because you wouldn't really wear a hat like that around Boston, would you? And I was just joking. But that to me is legit.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Sure.
it's like I
There
come from
are
Holy-
many Yankee fans in Milford. I'm one of them. I was born a Yankee fan. My grandfather was one. But the point is,
That explains
it's a rival. Hi, folks on the thing. Yes, you can scream at me at Hannaford's. But again, it's also interesting that when you saw America's game, which is baseball, not football, baseball, when you think about it.
Some of us think soccer, but that's okay.
Well, come stop, please, socialist. I mean, you haven't seen much of that there. And there you see a demographic
You know,
in
for the
Boston.
first time, I loved NASCAR, which I don't understand.
No.
But when I heard that their position was, don't even think about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we mentioned the fans at NASCAR, first of all. I mean,
No, but I mean, just, I got a
You'll be
kick
chased
out
out
of
of the
it.
at
state, yeah.
Talladega,
Yeah.
you better,
Don't even think
show,
about it.
They have a
don't,
fast car, right?
yeah, don't even show up. Don't even
But see,
show up.
again, to me, it's like making fun of somebody's mother. It just doesn't feel
Well, but then you get into how it started, and you have Colin Kaepernick,
who's filed a grievance now saying,
yeah. Well, I think Al Sharpton must have talked to him
Collusion
to
between
try
the
and.
coaches.
I think it's
Well,
probably Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton wants to shake down the
let's take
NFL.
a step back and say collusion. If I owned a sports team
Yeah.
and I got a player who's, his glory days are behind him, who's going to bring a ton of controversy
That's him.
and defocus my team, do I want to pay millions of dollars for that?
Yeah.
No,
Well,
absolutely not.
I guess
I can put a pit bull in the middle of the team and defocus them, and that pit bull won't cost me millions of dollars a year.
Michael Vick tried
Oh,
that.
stop. But I don't understand why you'd say it was collusion. I don't think it's collusion. I think he's...
you see the Kaepernick thing, and you actually connected with. I guess he's in, the famous involvement. I guess has a fiance or girlfriend who's quite radical, and she's made some controversial remarks about some Baltimore Ravens players, about different that. So I think somewhat maybe influenced that, but you saw what he originally did this for, and this was about the Black Lives Matter movement. Okay, in his mind. He then went so far as to wear a Che Guevara shirt in Miami at a Miami game, which really the Cuban Americans must have been, enthused about that. So you
again-
wonder about his worldview.
Ed, regardless of what his view is,
Yeah,
if I own a company,
there's no question.
I own a sports team, and you're coming in, you could be the uber right guy, that's just ultra conservative, and if you're causing confusion and defocusing activities, why do I want you on my team?
That's the
I mean,
point.
that to me is legit. And then I look and say, if you were Tom Brady at his peak, maybe somebody closes their eyes and says, on balance, it's worth putting up with.
It's not just about talent anymore. It's about the brand, right? The brand of the team.
Yeah, yeah.
And so,
You can imagine
Yeah.
and you say the branding. Was it Nike? Michael Jordan was at Nike, and then I guess an ad executive who was since probably in Siberia decided that Stephen Curry wasn't what they wanted, so they let him go. So now they figured that calculation was worth how many billions of dollars. He's with Under Armour. How many billions of dollars, because here's a role model, a great player, great family guy, whatever. So we all know, I mean, I guess the poorest owner in the NFL is Al Davis, I believe, at the Raiders. He's worth $150 million, but the rest are all billionaires, multi-billionaires. So again, anything that affects the bottom line.
Well, I think it's more than that, too, because Kraft did a miracle. He turned a sports team into an empire. I mean, he's got the whole Patriot Place. But most of the people, it's an ego thing. I own a basketball team. I own a football team.
Yeah, there's some who own multiple teams.
But if you're hurting my image,
Bottom line.
why do I want you?
Bottom line.
You know, and it's not even just saying you're hurting me financially, because I guess if I'm worth a few billion, if you take a couple $100 million off my P&L statement, it's not going to break me.
Well, part of it, too, is that this has taken attention away from some of the behavioral issues in some of the sport athletes, because we're concentrating on a political statement, and you're not talking about some of the regular stories about, troubles with the athletes, however you want to phrase it.
Chris, you're taking over. What message do you want to give to the voting population here in Milford?
Sure, I would just put a plug in that, if you're looking to get involved, or even in a more minimal sense, just learn more about the committee. We'd love to have you at a meeting sometime. You can email me at chriskivior@gmail.com. Certainly ChrisKivior@gmail.com. Certainly I'd love to answer any questions, maybe have you in a meeting. Just since we had that Milford Daily News article, we had 3 people reach out to me looking to get involved and hopefully join the committee. So just looking to spread the word, and certainly shoot me an email if you'd like.
And as always, this show will never ask you to vote for a specific candidate or a specific party. We will beg you to become informed. Whether it's blue, red, green, or I don't know what we call unenrolled people. I guess we're just purple people, in between the blue and the red. Get to know.
Beige.
We're not beige. I'm not dealing with beige. I'm calling purple.
Taupe.
There are sometimes I love you, Uncle Ed, but then there's times like now.
Hey,
But seriously, get involved, and please get out and vote. So to our 6 loyal viewers, may tomorrow be a better night than tonight. May God bless. Good night, and thank you for joining us.
Far too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just searching for my soul.